Hi, I'm Randi Altman with postPerspective, and we're here with Alex Trudeau, Viriato. Alex, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Now, we're here to talk about the Bon Jovi documentary, Thank You, Good Night, The Bon Jovi Story,
That's right.
of which you were a producer and an editor on as well. So why don't we just dive in? How did you guys get involved in a documentary to begin with?
In 2020, I was working with Religion of Sports and Gotham Chopra, who was directing a documentary on Tom Brady, his 10 Super Bowl appearances and 20-year career. And in that series, we wanted to do something a little bit out of the norm, a little bit outside of football. And so we came up with all these symbolisms and metaphors to go along with all the football footage. And we took some pretty bigger creative chances for a football doc. And John Bon Jovi saw that and saw the creative directions we were taking and what we were doing with something that could have just been football. And so he reached out to us directly and said, I saw you guys do this for Tom. I've been around for 40 years. What would you guys do with that? And so I got the call standing right here, like John Bon Jovi wants you to make a documentary about him. And so that was pretty fun, surreal moment. And a moment to be kind of like, what do I have to say about Bon Jovi? What do I have to, why would I take this on? And so you start looking through the albums. I had some other albums already. So you just start digging around, and Gotham, Giselle, myself, and different members of the team, we decided to make 3 scenes. And we made 3 scenes with one John interview and then sent it to him. And then we were off to the races after that, after he kind of loved the direction that, then the cadence and pacing and the way that it was all cut together. He was a big fan. So then we started from there.
Well, that explains him wearing the Patriots jacket, which, a New Jersey
Yes.
guy wearing a Patriots sacrilege. I was a little concerned for his safety at that point, but that explains a lot. The doc begins with Bon Jovi going through all of his archives and his tapes and stuff like that. So was that essentially how it began for you, getting the footage from him on the many different, big giant VHS?
Kind of. It was a little bit. It seems like you would just go in there and collect it all and be like, and this is the stuff. Here we go. But it wasn't that. So he was having it digitized for their 40th celebration, regardless whether we were doing the documentary or we were the ones going through it. He was starting to archive all of these pieces that he had in his basement. So that was going through a company, and they were doing their thing. So we kind of jumped in in the middle of their process. So we didn't have everything right off the bat. It was kind of, we had a few things, we had a few photos and random receipts and things like that, but it would all trickle in through the process. We didn't start with everything, which created its own challenges of like, what was in that box? What was that was labeled this, but it was something else. And so it was a constant shuffle of different footage you were getting, or kind of just go on the internet and pull random stuff and let's see if we can license it. And sometimes I would just go rogue because I just wanted to see kind of what we could make it feel like. What is this scene? What can we do with this? Pretending we knew what was coming in, but you were mostly guessing what was going to come out of that basement.
So did you sort of know how you were going to tell the story prior to getting all of that footage? Because there's a lot of different time frames and going back and forth in years. So was that all mapped out, or did that sort of just happen naturally as you started getting the footage?
It was mapped out in the sense that John had pitched it as 4 episodes, each one is a decade. And we kind of knew that was like a loose, like we don't really need to end on 1990 if that's not thematically or story-wise where it ends. But that seemed like a good gauge, like the things that they've done, the amount of albums they've had, 10 years. So that was our starting point. But beyond that, there was nothing around that. It was just 10. So the balance really came with episode 1 of like, how many times are we going to switch to John of 2022 and John of the 80s and 90s? And that balance was really found in episode 1 of like, because you could use your time jump as a tool to juxtapose what was happening in the 80s or to complement it. That would kind of dictate how often I would cut to 2022 to tell the story of John having vocal issues, which was only told to us as we started the process. We went in thinking like, yeah, Bon Jovi, like, how did you get to be one of the greatest rock bands in the world? And then this real-time issue popped up, and it was like, oh, that's a thing. That's a very big thing that is now the stakes are happening in real time, and the issues are unraveling as we're going through it. And that we felt would give our documentary a unique, not only structure, but voice for what he's going through, and something that is relatable in the now. This guy who's known for something and so famous for something is losing it. So people may not be able to relate to him as a rock star, but you can relate to someone not being able to do what they love anymore. And you can tap into that. Like, we are all going to have to make choices of how we spend our time and what we do, and we're not going to be able to do everything forever. So you can relate to John Bon Jovi and what he's going through, because it's pretty hard to relate to him as he's singing in front of 20,000 people. It's a little bit unattainable.
Yeah. Well, what I was taken with was, so I grew up watching John Bon Jovi and listening to him, and you just see sort of like a pretty face and fantastic hair. But what I took from the documentary was how bright he is and what kind of businessman he became, and how he sort of like, so that was a big part of your story right there.
Yeah, he is just a talented human. Like we knew early on that the documentary wasn't going to be like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, because it wasn't like they were going out and doing all the crazy things in the 80s. It was more about dedication and hard work, perseverance, and brotherhood. And that was John. John was so dedicated to doing that. And then when it came time to manage it, he was so dedicated to making sure that that worked. And then there's the restaurant that they opened, the food kitchen. It's like now they're dedicated to that. So everything he's doing, he says in the doc, he wants to do everything 100%, and he just goes all in. So when he's doing these things, he's very committed to doing them the best to his ability, and he's interested in a lot of different things. And so he's the businessman, he's the musician, he's the dad, he's a pretty incredible person. And then when you get to work with them, you're working with another artist who's also trying to keep that level, and who understands that everyone on this team wants to be that same level. They want to be the John Bon Jovi of what they're doing. So
talk a little bit about your organizational process, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different years. There's a lot of different footage. How did you work through that?
We had a lot of different string outs going, because a funny thing that would happen with the footage is that you'd get a VHS recording of a music video, and that VHS recording also had a random football game on it, and then a random interview with him from Australia. And you're like, what is this tape? How did this tape even become? And you don't really know if you can use it, because it's a recording of something else that doesn't belong to the person who recorded on the VHS tape. So it's not like it gives you access to use it to do this. That kind of created different ways of, where are we putting all these pieces and where are they going together? It was usually by topic. What's John talking about? What era is this in? And then having just long string outs. But they started getting so long that you're scrubbing through 10-hour string outs. And I remember when my assistant editor Charles had a string out once, and it exceeded the max. It was like 24 hours, and it was already, you couldn't make it any longer. It's just like we had put in so many things in these string outs that they were so long, and that we had tapped out. But yeah, you kind of do it by year or by topic, so that you can go back into these different interviews and different archival pieces. But by the end, we felt we had a good grasp on everything, but it got so big and it got so many different moments that it's like, Charles, remember that one interview where he's sitting and there's a plant behind him and he's talking about that, and you're like, oh yeah, and then you'd have to like try and investigate and figure out where you once saw that on this one random tape that you did. And so it got real interesting at the end there.
You guys were not only showing footage of Bon Jovi and their concerts, you were also sort of showing footage of what was going on politically at the time, and painting the time frame and what they were going through with what the country was going through and the world was going through as well.
Yeah. That also established early in episode 1, when he's going through the 60s. I wanted there to be a taste of what was going on around him too, with the images, and then try and tie it back into what we were foreshadowing. Like there's a little bit of Elvis, and Elvis is like, he's back in singing form, and like different, and then there's Kennedy, and I tried to use different presidents from when he was going. So every episode has the relative presidents that are in there, and just give you a little bit of taste of the times that they're in, because I feel like that's so integral to usually what they're singing about. In the beginning, they're singing, he even jokes that they're singing about cars and girls, but like that really evolved. And by episode 4, there's so much more poeticness and relevance to what he's seeing, and different albums represent different mind spaces that he's in. By the time he's singing 2020, he's more literal of what he's watching on television. And then there's a mixture of those with stories. But I always wanted to give a little bit of perspective of what they were seeing around them, in terms of, whether it's social issues or political issues, or the surroundings that they were in.
There are a lot of different formats, a lot of different quality of footage. I know you used Adobe Premiere, and I know that that's one of the benefits of Premiere is that you could put a bunch of different formats in the timeline, and it works pretty well. So just talk us through that process a little bit.
Yeah, we chose Adobe right off the bat. We had just come off Man in the Arena, which was on Adobe as well, and we were using their productions program, which for us was great on Man in the Arena because we had multiple editors and multiple assistant editors, and we were all able to work fairly seamlessly without ever interrupting each other. So when it came to Bon Jovi, we went right back into that, and they were working on some different betas that we were excited about. The transcription was coming in, and we knew in documentaries you have to send off your interviews, it gets transcribed, you bring it back in. But there was a feature that was just about to release that was going to allow us to transcribe not only our interviews but our sequences themselves, which we were excited to start tapping into. For me, the way I look at the timeline and the way everyone is color coordinated, Adobe is the best for me, the way I see it in my brain. John's always green, David Bryan's orange, Tico Torres is violet, and I can see how the interviews are playing out. How much is John? How much is his bandmates? How much is Doc McGee? And it gives me just a little visual representation of how much I'm including everybody and where's the balance and who's too much and who's too little. It seems like it would be irrelevant, but for me, it's the kind of like the puzzle in my brain, how it works, all the colored boxes of like, it helps me see where there are imbalances or maybe something I need to revisit and see if there's any other voices that are relevant in this moment. And that's really one of the main things for me for Adobe is being able to drop in all the media. Like I said, I would go rogue. I would, Vimeo, YouTube, and just this, and then hopefully you go back and get the real stuff. But sometimes you just want to see how the ideas work and how the scene plays out. If you did have the material, like, is this even worth exploring? Is it worth sending our archival producer Shane down this rabbit hole to get all these things if the idea wasn't even going to work in the first place? If the way that I was going to edit it, if that wasn't going to work, then there's no sense in getting all these other pieces.
What about the quality of the footage? Did you guys have to do any sort of restoration on any of it, or did you sort of embrace the quality? And
it was a mixed bag. I remember there was some tapes that had mold, and there was like they'd been in there too long, and we couldn't get those. But that was like the extreme of the circumstances. But no, mostly we were able to get the right version of it. MTV was a big process because they had a limit what we were going to use, and we were way above that, and so we had to work with them. And then there's MTV Australia, there's MTV America, there's MTV, and every department was different. They all collected it differently, and some people had records and other people didn't. And then other times, if you did, they would be like, well, we own that, but what you have on YouTube, that's the best. We don't even know where that file is. That's as good as it's going to get. So then it's a clip by clip basis. You're going to make the call. Like, is this good enough to stay? And there were ones that weren't. It was just too much. It wasn't worth the distraction to have such a pixelated image. Like, yes, it's the 80s, but it wasn't that. The technology wasn't that bad. So we would swap that out and then try to get something that was even relevant, because it's all, the visuals are great. And then especially with if it's acting as B-roll, you really just need to tap into the same emotion of it. Sometimes it doesn't matter if it's that show or is that the right timeline or if this is from a music video. It's what emotion are those guys giving me while the interviewee is talking, and is it gonna give you the same subtext of what I'm trying to portray of what they're talking about, and give you an idea of what he's referencing. And if you can do that, then you can really start using different footage from different times or different reactions, because the story should still play the same way. I never felt like there was a clip we took out or had to swap that was detrimental to what, like, the messaging wasn't coming across anymore. We were able to get everything, and that's a big compliment to our archival producer that really went out there and called rock and roll photographers and be like, we need this one image, and then he'd be like, oh, I actually have 50 images from that day. Here, do you want them? And we're like, yes, everything, all the stuff, because there's some pretty barren years there where it's like before they blow up, they're not just filming everything. People aren't just photographing them all the time, and sometimes it was really hard to find them recording Slippery When Wet was quite a challenge. We had to really track down that photographer.
What about the Bruce Springsteen getting up on stage and singing with him? Was that one of his tapes, or was that something you guys had to track down?
They had the photos. John had those. I think there's maybe 5 photos from that night. He's wearing a scarf, and those are John just had them done. It was that was the great thing about Bruce, is that some of these music documentaries, they pull in all these voices and they get really talented musicians, and it's great. But Bruce, we could put Bruce right in the fast lane. We could put him in these positions where he saw John. That really created a unique energy. And plus, he's Bruce. I mean, he's the boss. He's fantastic, and it was great to have him
So why don't we talk about the freshly recorded interviews? The shots of John, the shots of the band, even Bruce. What footage? How was that captured?
Also, sometimes it was Gotham with a small camera running and shooting with him, and they would shoot on the fly. And other times, the different interview setups. We had a DP, Jessica, who would go to all these different locations, a lot of different rock stars all over the United States, and get those interviews. And then, really, I think some of the greatest moments in there is just Gotham with a little camera pointing it at John, because he had created such an authentic relationship with him that he got those vulnerable moments, like with John on the couch when he's talking about how important all this stuff is to him. It's not always planned, but because your director has taken the time to create and have this relationship flourish together, they're probably going to be friends forever at this point. But they're waiting for the right moments to do those kinds of things and ask those kinds of questions and wait for the process to kind of happen as a big thing for him. Relationships is really where he starts from. So that was really the access to all those guys was through that.
Now, for you, what was the most challenging part of the edit? Like, I think it was the first episode. Was it living on a prayer? And you were dispersing video of him when he was young, and then that was episode 2.
Yeah, episode 2. That was so. Living on a Prayer was kind of like this. Episode 2 was a monster, because if you were talking about back to what we were talking about 10 years, that one felt like impossible. How do I do that in one? Because there's their explosion, there's them becoming a band, them learning how to play together, John the performer, running up on the rafters, and then they're gonna do Slippery When Wet, and then they're gonna do New Jersey, and then they're gonna go to Guadalajara. Like it seemed unattainable to put that all into one episode, but if we did that, then everything else would get pushed. So the goal was then they become a band, and you want to get to Guadalajara, where they kind of want to go on separate planes and not see each other anymore. That seemed like the arc that we could do. And if you moved the Guadalajara to the next episode, it's like, what are we going to start an episode with them this not working out? It felt a little bit repetitive with the two albums that were very similar in terms of success and hits. Putting those on separate episodes seemed like, oh, let's do it again. Oh, here's another montage of how big they are. That didn't really work out. So it was episode 2. That was kind of, those were the parameters. We need to get from here to here, and everything else happens in between. Some stuff's going to get cut. And it's like, when are you going to celebrate Living on a Prayer? Like, everyone's waiting for it. Everyone wants to sing it. Everyone knows it. It's the most famous song that they have. And I remember hinting at it a few times, and I had the vocal tracks, and I was able to put in different pieces. And then it felt like the right moment to celebrate it would be this 2022 John, feeling good, feeling great. Like, he just seemed happy and joyous to do it. And then intercut that with the energy, even though chronologically we hadn't got to some of those moments yet, but put it all together and see how many times this song has been sung and celebrated and how we got to this point. And that was a lot of fun to put together. And part of the collaboration with John too, because that scene originally with Living on a Prayer was like cut. It was intercut like that, but he made a comment of like, what if you went even further down the timeline? So you see something from the 90s and 2000s. And so I started putting all that together and really just making a celebration of the song and the whole band before you get to Guadalajara. And they're like, yeah, we don't want to be together right now. We'd like to do something different. So you celebrate it before you crash it and break it all down.
Now, it might be in my imagination, but I saw that there were some effects that were put in I think maybe toward the end of episode 3, early episode 4. Maybe I just missed them because I was so involved in the story in the first couple of episodes. So talk about some of the effects that you put in and how you created them.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming you're talking about like graphic treatment or any kind of
like the water. I think it was in episode 4, the water and
yeah. So those episode 4 are some of my favorite moments because there were just kind of these creative epiphanies. And so we had a really great creative designer, Kenan. He was in from the beginning, but he was the guy, if we had photos, he would take a receipt and a little badge and then put the photo and then put little pieces of tape on the photo and just make it in this authentic space with all these other memorabilia around the photo. So you weren't just looking at a photo. And I talked to him a lot. We would collaborate on what were we watching? Did you see this way they designed this in this one movie? And we were just sending ideas back. And he's such a brilliant designer and creative mind to never take away from the story, but how can it be additive? How can we add other elements around it? When does this photo just need to be celebrated as a full and not be touched and not have any movement and do that? So there was a constant collaboration there. When we got to episode 4, I finally started getting the vocal stems and the stems of all the different tracks. And I knew I wanted to use his vocal track as part of the dialogue of what he was talking about, as if it was another interview. So using the lyrics of the song to also move the story forward or to also comment on the story. So Living with a Ghost in episode 4, it's a reflection of what he's talking about in that episode. And I was able to use that and cut it together. And then you're distorting it like his voice is underwater in these waves. And he's like, it was almost this metaphor of like John's drowning in what he's dealing with and the band and what he's going through. And he's got kids and he's got that. So it was really just that, maybe not even metaphor, but this kind of the symbolism of what he was dealing with. And how can you treat the vocal track like that? And how can you take it one step further than just writing him, because we'd already written the lyrics, we had all that in 1 and 2, and there was just another iteration of that because we wanted every episode to evolve. So it was a lot of fun to really take those vocal tracks and break them apart and put them underneath and put filters on them and let the songs also help us tell the story too.
So if you had to look back, what were some of your favorite moments in terms of the editing, and the most difficult and the most challenging, and what you're most proud of?
What I just talked about is definitely one that when it clicked, when we started using his vocal tracks and I started working with our composer Miles to be like, what if we don't play the Bon Jovi song? We put a score and we let his voice tell us the story, and we put something a little bit more cinematic underneath. That was one of my favorite collaborations, was with Miles. Like, how can we change this a little bit? How can we do Bon Jovi but do it a little bit different, and then remove the drums or remove this other element? And then we actually work backwards from there too, to go back into 2 and go back into 1, and where can you put them and have those little pieces of the song to play out, because it was difficult. You had so many songs to work with, and some are helping the story and other ones are meant to be celebrated. Like It's My Life kind of changes the tone and brings it into this moment, and here's the song and it's a great thing. And others aren't as predominant, but you have to make choices of which songs you're going to use. So it's something I did think I was going to get from John, because John was never dictating. It wasn't like use this or use that. Like, John was very much on the outskirts. He was letting us make it, and then we would send him like, this is the cut, and then he could give input as to what maybe is this show actually happened after that, or actually I was watching Bryan Adams and that's the idea, and you're like, oh, that's really great. You had insight from the man himself, and we could talk to all the other band members either. I created a relationship with Phil X, and I could ask him questions directly just to make sure that this is what was happening. This was clarity. So the collaboration was really fun. Using the vocal stems was really incredible, and then the songs, the different styles with the vocal stems, and then episode 2 in totality was a really great. I mean, you're such a rich time for them with the footage and what you're going through and filtering through all these things in the 80s. Episode 2 will probably be one of the most favorite things I've ever cut. It was a beast. We had a 2-hour rough cut, and it felt like we got it. Like this is the show. Like, we're gonna do it. Like, this is gonna be great. Like, let's do all 4 right now. And so that's probably my strongest memory, is when I was done with that first rough cut of episode 2. I knew we had something.
Now, you talked about showing John some cuts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You guys used Frame as part of your workflow, Frame.io as well?
That's right. Yeah. So we could send him a cut, password protected, and then put a limit on it, so we knew that cuts weren't floating and the ethos of the internet either. So yeah, we would use Frame for internal team members to comment, and different collaborators could come in and comment on that. But that was the way we shared. Also with Kenan, with animations, those would go through Frame as well, and then we could comment directly on animations and watch that and give notes back to him. So it was not just for me. I was making my notes to him through that as well. And with the other editors, we had an editor in Colorado, Brady Hames, who was doing episode 3 while I was on 2, and so we were collaborating as well and constantly talking.
In terms of Premiere, why is it so suited to editing documentaries? Why is it your tool of choice?
For me personally, it's because I like to bring things in, and I like to have not that I like it, but I find myself needing to bring in different formats and bringing in different types of footage. And for any editor who knows, like when you're in a groove or when you have an idea and you're really excited about it, I don't always want to be like, here's this link and here's the path and here's this and here's these clips and can you bring those in? And then like time passes and this and that. Sometimes I'm just like, oh, what if I had that? YouTube this or whatever it is and just grab it. And I just want to get it in and put it in and ride the energy that I'm feeling. And I don't want to do that. It does create a little bit of work on the back end when you try to do it legally. Luckily, I had a team that supported and knew that how my brain was working, and that's why I wanted to do it, is just bring it in. And you're just in Adobe. I find with something, I'll just start stacking them or bringing in all these video clips and keeping in a sequence, and you feel like you're working in a box with all your tools. And these are all the things that I want to use, and these are all the ideas that I have. And like, all right, what does this look like? And you're just plugged in to this idea, and you want to keep adding to it and be in this sequence and figure out this idea that you just had. And I feel like it allows me to keep that focus because I can do so much of it on my own as well. And I don't need to go through all the channels to just get some of these things in there. And then there are times where you do need to do that. You can't be, not everything can be done that way. Not everything can be on the fly. There is a process. We do have a team that wants to be able to make sure that we can get these pieces and that we're getting them correctly because there's so many, and that everything's being tracked and everything's being labeled, and you want to respect their job and their process. But to be able to have the mixture is something I really appreciate, because then at the end of the day, I feel like we're making a better story because of it.
Now, Alex, you also have a producing credit on the show. How did that come about?
Time. Over time of just different collaborations with different people. It became, whether I was working with Miles, the composer, and talking to them, or working with Kenan, the animation, a lot was coming through edit. I was in a lot of those, or in every meeting. I'm also working with the other editors on the other episodes. And so it just became this all-encompassing, everything filtering through this editorial room, which is also my bedroom. This is where we cut it. I cut the episodes from my room, fully remote. Everybody was remote. Nobody was ever in the same room. So speaking of Frame.io and all those things, like that's what makes that possible. But it just became, I was collaborating with every department and everything was coming through. And so you're kind of overseeing a lot of these different things. And we had an executive producer, Giselle, and Gotham's an executive producer as well. And when everyone's kind of overseeing this whole thing, they included me as a producer for all that, for being involved in every process.
So you mentioned everybody working remotely. In addition to Frame, was there any other technology that sort of helped the process that you guys used? I mean, you have to make sure that everybody has the right internet connections and the right privacies, I'm assuming, as well.
Yeah, but we were coming right off of Man in the Arena, which is where we learned that this remote thing could work. I remember I was 2020 and I was 1 week into cutting Man in the Arena, and they were like, all right, so we're going to send you home with this computer and you're going to do everything until we figure out this whole pandemic. We're going to figure it out. And we found a way to make it work. And not only to make it work, but we're really proud of the show that we made by working remotely. And then I found a dynamic of being home with my family, and I have three boys, and I was home for dinner every day, and I was walking them to school every day. I became accessible to my family. And in the beginning, that was really hard. Everyone's popping through this door and, hey, Dad, you're home. Like, let's hang out. And you have to figure that balance out. It probably took 6 months where I actually felt like I wasn't just turning around going, Dad's working. And you're just kind of become this like monster because you think that this is your workspace. And they don't know the difference. So 6 months into it, I learned to give them my attention, come back to this, but I could break away a little bit easier. I found a way to be able to break away from an edit, give them my attention, stop, make dinner. I love to cook. So I'll always, almost every night I'll stop to do that. And I just figured that out in my schedule, because Religion of Sports, the company, found out that the time start here and end there didn't really make much sense for everybody. It's a tell me when it's due, tell me when we need to have this done, and I'll figure that out. I'll figure out my times to work, and whether it's before, after dinner, whatever it needs to be. But I could prioritize my family, and I could schedule when I was going to get these things done on my own time. So that's become the norm, and for Bon Jovi that was the same way. And I think John also really appreciated that the editor telling his story also had 3 boys and wanted the family first and wanted to create one of the greatest rock documentaries and push forward that, but also thinking about other elements in his life and try to find that balance, which is where I think he is now is balancing everything out in his life.
Before I let you go, you're I guess we could call you a veteran editor. You're still young, but you're a veteran editor. Any tips for those that are just starting out, or maybe switching careers, or just getting into editing? What would you tell them?
It's funny. I think I was talking to my wife about this the other day, but when I started as an editor, I was damn convinced that I was like a great editor, and I was like, I could cut it. I can cut anything. I could do it. I feel like I know what I'm doing. And you do more projects and you do more, and then you start, you reflect back on things that maybe they were good and maybe they're not, but it really did take time and different projects and collaborating with different people to really feel like now, like if you want veteran seems, it feels odd for me to say that, but now that I've been doing it for 10 years, like it's true. Like now I found a voice and I found a style, and that took time. It took time to really nuance everything and watch every eye line and going through every shot and every clip and making sure that I was making the choices that I wanted to as a filmmaker, and collaborating with different people. And in terms of advice, something that I've for the last couple of years, that particularly when you're talking about Tom Brady and you're talking about John Bon Jovi, it's two really big people who have public stories and have been there. So you as an artist, you have something to say too. You have something you want to put out there. You want to create work for people to watch, but you're within the confines of the story that a lot of people know. And it's a real person. I can only manipulate it so much. I have to tell his story, but not forgetting to do your art and say the things that you want to say within that material and the way you want to do it. I feel like that's really important. And that's why I'm brought on is I am bringing my perspective. I am choosing different clips than another editor would choose. I am latching on to Tom Brady's relationship with his sisters because I have a sister. I am tapping into the fatherhood because I am a father. So I'm going to lean towards all these things that I feel I have to say too, but within their story. So it could still be my art and my expression, but living within their authentic interviews and, different stories that they tell, and then making something that you feel is the right story to be told without meeting other people's expectations of what this should be, or what should the Tom Brady doc actually be about, or should it have metaphors and symbolisms? What Bon Jovi songs should be in here? It's like, go in there and make what you think is going to be the best version of this, because that's the only way for something to really be successful. Is just you need to be proud of it. You need to feel like that's the story that needs to be told.
Alex, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.